Hello and welcome to your Lab 9 instructional video on running water. This lab will focus on the development and identification of many fluvial features, as well as how to calculate a river's discharge based on a stream's velocity and area. So let's begin. Rivers are constantly modifying their channel and surrounding landscape, and as a result of this potential energy, as well as kinetic energy, the river cuts vertically into the channel. In fact, incision occurs mostly in a V shape, V as in Victor. This creates initially a deepened channel as a result of hydraulic action and abrasion. The solution may also be present if the river cuts down to the bedrock layer. Now, what ends up happening is at some point the river will cut down to a depth that the walls on either side cannot support its stress and its sheer weight, and will collapse and then become wider. Very much like at the beach when you dig a hole that's too deep and then the sides slump in, and then you keep digging, you never seem to go any deeper, but the hole gets wider and wider and wider. And what you'd be essentially creating is the idea of a floodplain. So below I've provided a ton of vocabulary with the definitions. If you're taking the lecture course, make sure you have these handy because this makes your life a lot easier because I already have the answers developed for you. As you work through this, we learn a little bit more about stream progression. As we identify here and throughout the lecture, is that there isn't time associated between these three diagrams. In fact, it's more about the maturity or the development. Look at how young and fresh and steep this gradient is. The river is flowing in a straight line. So the way that I examine and explain these three would imagine if you had a long table and you had it really at a high angle and you poured water from the top and it drained to the bottom. If it was really steep or being young, the water would go in a straight line very quickly downhill. Well, imagine that you remove a lot of material and you lose some of that slope. So maybe you lessen it by 50%. You pour water at the top and it still goes down, but it's not so fast in a straight line. It's able to wiggle a little bit because it's able to wiggle within its floodplain. This is more of a mature zone. Then lastly, maybe you lower it to almost nothing. It's almost completely flat. Again, pour the water. Of course, it goes downhill, but it's going to take a long way to get there. It's going to have these very rich winding meanders, oxbow lakes and abandoned channels, yazoo tributaries, large floodplain, maybe even delta environments. So you'll be able to look at these diagrams, use the phrases and definitions on the previous page to answer these questions. Here's some other diagrams to try to put it together. Here's a bunch of different vocab put together. This is the explanation of what ends up happening from top to bottom. Imagine again, if in the lecture I explain this like a freeway. If you're driving the freeway and you have a bunch of groceries in the trunk of your vehicle, but you make a sharp left-hand turn, everything gets thrown to the right. That source of energy, that talweg, which is the deepest and fastest part of a stream, gets pushed out to the outer edge, which therefore in this case, as the river's shooting down the river and gets thrown outwards, it'll cause erosion to occur here. The material that is removed from here gets transported and deposited here. What's removed here gets transported and deposited here. So we often find that there are cut banks or erosion banks opposite point bars or deposition banks. So very interesting. Nonetheless, we see all of these vocabularies that are thrown in here, all these different words for tributaries, distributaries, oxbow lakes, again, the source or the headwaters, the mouth where the river ends. Great source of all of these vocabularies. There are some videos within the modules that explain stream order. Here is a major creek in the Klamath Mountains region. You are looking at the drainage basin, first of Meta, which I've outlined. I'll do it again. It intersects here. It's a tributary, intersects the main channel. You're going to be counting all of the reaches that are within this area. Tributaries can be separated into sections called reaches. Each reach will be assigned a number, starting with 1. Anyway, we move here through Roach, which is this larger area here, and then Tule as well. Here's a diagram explaining it. You're essentially just counting all the individual tips, and then you do not count where it connects. So you only count all the little individual tips. As an example here, I'll use the Capel Creek as an example. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 total for Capel Creek. You will write your answers for Meta, Roche, and Tooley there. This walks us through calculating discharge. Discharge is a value of velocity times the actual area of a river. Area is calculated by width times depth. You'll work through this problem, but nonetheless, we can't just do width times depth because that's assuming that the river channel is a complete square. So what we do is we do width times depth of each individual portion. So what's easiest in this perspective, now that we know that this cross section of the river, each box is 1 square foot, count the whole squares. So there's a half one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and plus 2 halves is 10. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 and a half, 19, and so on and so forth. Once you calculate the area and using the provided discharge, you'll be able to calculate the velocity. Down here, you're going to read what it is, what the definition is for each of these drainage patterns, and then match it with the appropriate pattern on the side. Down here, we learn a little bit about flooding and flood frequency. Don't forget to answer question 8, which is discussing what are the differences within flooding in areas that are before urbanized versus after. Dirt, concrete. Creates friction, allows for absorption to occur. In this situation, allows water to transfer swiftly and more quickly. Then the last part is you have a great little diagram here. These are 4 different screenshots of a river. I would like for you to find 16 different vocab words that you can identify or place on here. 16 total, and they must be different. You can use any of the vocabulary throughout the lab or the textbook. Things you can use gradients, slopes. You can talk about that. You can talk about whether what stage of maturity a river might be in. You can talk about different river features. In fact, don't be limited to just what's drawn. Feel free to draw on your additional items, things that you think would fit within that region to better explain it. Again, I know this is very vocabulary based, but this is really going to prep you for matching the diagrams when you get to your final exam, as well as supporting your online lecture course with learning how these work. Be sure to check out the supplemental videos that are attached to the module, and we'll talk soon.